Whether I put this at the beginning of the video or not, this thing is going to be a Frankenstein hodgepodge mixed bag quilt stitched together editing nightmare. Hey there. How about that podcast, huh? Super comfortable to watch. Not super comfortable to watch. It was very uncomfortable. If you don't know what I'm talking about, of course you know what I'm talking about. Trisha Paytas went on Gabbie Hanna's podcast called Burnout. And coincidentally, I believe that video was posted the same day that I posted my last video, which was about Gabbie Hanna. And I saw it on my recommended, I think, and I'm pretty gabbied out, I think, for a while. But at the same time, Gabbie Hanna and Trisha Paytas, how am I going to avoid talking about that? Of course I'm going to talk about that. I have received so many DMs and comments because, like I said, I posted a video that day. A lot of the comments asked, am I going to give my thoughts on that podcast? Please give your thoughts on that podcast. And here we are. I forgot to mention until 8 minutes into recording that this video is technically #sponsored. Because as I promised you guys a glasses TryOn haul, which it's really only 4 pairs right now, but I told you guys we would do that, and this company sent me these glasses and is giving you guys a promo code. So if that's something you're interested in, maybe you're not into the podcast stuff and you just want to skip ahead to that. That's fine too. #sponsored, glasses TryOn at the end. Stick around for that or jump ahead to that. I don't find the podcast itself to be the most interesting part. I mean, you guys have all probably seen it at this point. I haven't checked the views on it, but I'm sure that the views on that episode are much higher than any other episode on Burnout. I could be wrong. That's not me trying to shade Gabbie's podcast. It's just people are talking about it, right? So of course, like, a lot of people wanted to see what went down between these two at a time that, frankly, I think was premature. So just to give my surface level opinion about the podcast, super eye-catching, a good idea on Gabbie's part in some ways, in other ways not so much. It just felt premature. It seemed like these ladies both needed some time to heal from these situations. Insert time already. I just want to recognize that while I say a couple of times in this video I refer to Gabbie and Trisha as women or ladies, I do want to recognize that Trisha Paytas identifies as non-binary with the pronouns they, them, and she, her, I believe preferring the latter. While Trisha Paytas is non-binary, she often refers to herself as a woman, a lady, a girl, a chick, what have you. I do apologize partway through the video and recognize that I should be referring to them as people more often than women or ladies, but the topic of women's issues and how these two people approach and interact with those issues comes up and is important. So I'm going to leave this as it is, but I do want to make it very clear that I recognize that Trisha Paytas identifies as non-binary. Of course, I am not any sort of expert on trans issues, and I especially am not any sort of expert on how Trisha Paytas' experience is with being non-binary. So if you know more than I do, which you very well probably do, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks. And maybe talked a little bit more before they went on camera. Or I've heard some people say, and I agree, if they were truly going to hash it out, and we hear they did because they had like 3 different breaks where apparently things got super heated and emotional. It would have been interesting to see that footage. But I understand, like, you get to a point where you're like, this is not something that I want people to see. So it just kind of ended up being this disjointed conversation that felt forced in many ways, that was just uncomfortable, where both parties looked uncomfortable, especially Trisha. And I think that Trisha's discomfort came across as very kind of stoic, kind of cutting at times. And I think some of that too is just Trisha kind of being like as forward as she is. Gabbie definitely came off as the more tender and sensitive person in this dynamic. So they would have made an interesting balance to each other, I think, if they were ready. I don't know, maybe they try it again in 6 months and we see something different. Who knows? I don't know if I stated this already, but what I find to be more interesting is the follow-up videos, or are the follow-up videos that Trisha Paytas posted either the day or a couple days after this podcast was posted. And in these videos, Trisha is very civil and protective of Gabbie Hanna, but also trying to kind of defend herself and explain some of the situations and what happened in between those cuts. You can see in these videos that she is trying really hard to keep things calm, to keep things civil, to keep things respectful. And I do think she did a really good job at that.
And I hope you can tell by my tone that I'm being like very sincere and not gaslighty or anything like that. Like, I keep getting this. And if anything, this video is to defend myself and to not attack anyone else, because as far as I'm concerned, like, me and Gabbie are cool.
I'm glad that we got more context. I would be interested to hear from Gabbie's side if there is more context to this conversation from her perspective. Though I'll be honest with you, I am not apt to trust Gabbie's memory over most people's. Again, that's not any shade at Gabbie Hanna. I don't think that she would go on camera and lie about these situations. And I don't think that she was trying to lie on this podcast in these moments where there was a lot of disagreement about events. I just think that perhaps Gabbie's perception of events and memory of those events, I don't find to be reliable. And that's it. So I have notes about these 2 follow-up videos that Trisha posted. Something titled something like, we need to address something, or I need to address this. And then the other one was just called part 2. And so Trisha was kind of all over the place in explaining all of the things that happened that day and how she felt and what we didn't see, etc. She was kind of all over the place. So I'm going to seem all over the place too, probably. I'll try not to be, but I'm just going to kind of go in order of what Trisha talked about. Oh, timeout. I'm going to have to put this at the beginning of the video. Okay, back to it. Filming is a lot harder than it looks. Like, it's really hard. So Trisha's 2 videos. She starts off talking, I guess, about the comments that she was seeing on the podcast itself. And I believe it sounded like she wanted to address the topic of gaslighting. If you didn't watch the podcast, which of course you did, there were moments when Gabbie would talk about how she remembers having a pretty decently close friendship with Trisha Paytas, and Trisha did not remember things that way. Or she said she didn't remember things that way. And Gabbie would give examples. Well, what about the time that you said that you bought this because I wore it in a video? You tweeted this. I think she said something like, we would have heart-to-hearts, and you called me that one time, and I think apparently Gabbie remembered Trisha inviting her to Thanksgiving one year, which we'll address. But with a lot of these things, Trisha, at times she did say that didn't happen, and a good bit she just said, okay, I don't remember that. I don't remember. And so apparently in the comments, people were saying that Trisha was gaslighting Gabbie. Which, if you truly, in your heart of hearts, believe that those things actually happened and Trisha absolutely knows they happened, which I think a lot of Gabbie's fans probably feel and think, then of course it looks like gaslighting. So it makes sense. And in these videos, I think I already said this, but Trisha seems really calm and civil. And she does kind of start out by saying that she wants to defend herself when it comes to comments like these, but also wanted to state that Gabbie was very nice to her, that she thinks that they left on a good note. And she knows just from being on podcasts that it is her job to respect the edit. That's how she said it. And I find that to be pretty mature of her, but Trisha has been in this business for a long time, so it makes sense. She did express an interest in wanting to just like squash the beef, or as much as they could, I guess. And another thing she said that I found to be interesting is she meaning Trisha, thought that meeting Gabbie Hanna would humanize Gabbie in Trisha's eyes. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And she said, I think she even said that that is why she went on the H3 podcast the first time she did, is because she didn't have a good rapport with the Kleins after a video Ethan made on the H3 channel. And she points out that meeting people kind of humanizes them. That's the word that she used, and it makes sense. That's the proper word, I suppose. But yeah, after giving these disclaimers, like, hey, Gabbie was nice to me. Hey, we don't have bad blood. She just wanted to clear her name. So she did kind of get into the whole Trisha's gaslighting Gabbie thing. So in terms of whether or not Gabbie and Trisha were friends years ago or whenever they're talking about, Trisha makes a good point. Perception is reality. In Gabbie's mind, they were friends. In Trisha's mind, they were not. So it's like a Schrodinger's friendship. Until it's hashed out, they are both friends and not friends at the same time. And it almost seemed like this podcast set out to open that box and see which it is. And I don't think that they were ready, like I said, to really figure that out. But I do think once people have a talk and somebody states, we are not friends, I don't consider you a friend, I do think at that point, a line is drawn in the sand. It's nobody's place to like press that issue. And now I'm kind of jumping ahead, but Trisha did compare. I liked the metaphor she used. She compared it to her past experience dating. And she said sometimes she thought in her mind that she was dating someone when there really was no relationship established. So she would get her feelings hurt when she would see some sort of indicator that this guy was behaving like a single guy. And so she recognized that can be very hurtful, but that is also due to a misconception in the mind of that person. So as far as the details that kind of like support Gabbie's argument that they were friends, it sounded almost like half of the points she brought up, she being Gabbie, could have happened or probably happened. And the other half, it's very confusing where that stuff came from. One of the examples that Trisha used is Gabbie remembered Trisha inviting her to Thanksgiving one year. And Trisha explains to us that that absolutely cannot be true because she doesn't even invite boyfriends to Thanksgiving dinner, that every year it is her dad, and her stepmom. Every year. She said, I don't even invite boyfriends. I don't bring my sister. I don't bring my mom. It's just the three of us. So I do think it's strange that that is in Gabbie's memory, and I'd like to know where that came from. Surely you'd be able to falsify that, right? Or prove it to be true. It probably would exist in text messages, I would think. But who knows? This stuff is all just subject to these two ladies' memories and what they tell us. So Trisha said several times, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. And that is, like we've said, that is where these comments about gaslighting came from. And Trisha explained that in some of those situations, she legitimately did not remember. So as an example, some of the things that she might have tweeted, I bought this because Gabbie wore it. I saw this in Gabbie's video. Like, I could see Trisha tweeting something like that. But I also believe her when she says she doesn't remember that. And it seemed like other things, including like this Thanksgiving situation, Trisha was saying, I don't remember that, as she says, her polite way of saying that didn't happen. Meaning, no, like, I'm not going to argue with you. And she does say at one point that at some point when things started to get heated, Trisha did state that she did not want to get combative with Gabbie, particularly because she was in Gabbie's home. And that's a thing for Trisha, which makes sense. She said something like, Gabbie, I'm not going to combat this with you. And according to Trisha, Gabbie then accused her of gaslighting. And that is, I don't want to sound like I'm shit-talking Gabbie Hanna in this video, but that is exactly what my video was about last week. How is that gaslighting? I don't want to argue, even if it was just like, whatever, I don't want to argue this anymore, have it, fine. That's not gaslighting, darling. Like, that is not gaslighting. And certainly not somebody saying, hey, I don't feel comfortable getting combative in your home. Perhaps they work that out between cuts. But that part I found to be just kind of disheartening. I feel like there are plenty of reasons to be upset with Trisha Paytas, and that just didn't seem like one of them. So Trisha then goes on to talk about her discomfort while filming this podcast. She briefly mentions that Gabbie Hanna talked to Trisha about her mother having BPD, compared her mom to Trisha, which I think will come up again. But they basically had this long conversation beforehand, and it started to be overwhelming. And so she explains that she probably was very closed off because she was uncomfortable. She said several times in these videos that she was uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that she refuses to watch the podcast. That's kind of sad to me because they did end on a good note or on a decent note. But I guess if Trisha just remembers that as the most uncomfortable she's ever been, that would make sense that she wouldn't want to watch it back. So Trisha was reiterating how uncomfortable she was and kind of why, about how the two of them, particularly Gabbie, would open up between takes, but then how all of these emotions would be very overwhelming. And then by the time they turned the cameras back on, Trisha was very overwhelmed and confused and uncomfortable. She then goes on to address the conversation they had around music, particularly women in music, and even more particularly Gabbie and her music career, and the things that Trisha said last year in a video, something about starting your music career at 30, essentially telling Gabbie that it's not feasible for her to make it in the music industry. And I remember this, I don't want to call it an argument, but this discussion, heated discussion, very uncomfortable discussion happening between the two of them. And the way I saw it was like you had a super idealist talking to a super realist at the same time, and potentially having two very different conversations, because Trisha did defend her stance on that. And in this conversation, Trisha was essentially saying that it's possible to be successful in starting a career later in life, but it's not probable. That making it in this industry at this age would be the exception, not the rule. And Gabbie seemed pretty upset by that. And I think Gabbie wanted Trisha to lift her up woman to woman and tell her that, all of her dreams can and will come true, that it's gonna happen. And Gabbie started to make this point in the name of feminism. And then I remember Trisha saying something about like, that's sexist too, to tell me that I should agree with you just because you're another woman. I'm not going to say whether or not I agree with that point, but I do think that it's unfair for Gabbie to tout whatever activism she wants to perform when it benefits her. These two women were fighting for the past over a year, and it was nasty. So I don't understand how now, the first time the two of them get together and are supposed to be hashing things out, Trisha is supposed to be super supportive of Gabbie. I don't agree with that, because then you could go back and say that Gabbie talking about Trisha's sexual health behind her back, or even Gabbie just talking to Shane Dawson about Trisha's sexual health, is not in the name of feminism, because it is not women uplifting women. And Gabbie has not uplifted Trisha from what we've seen during this time. The whole Call Me Crazy, this song was meant for Trisha Paytas thing. It was very awkward, and from what I saw, people did not find it to be respectful to Trisha at all. So on that discussion, I think that it's almost like a trump card. No, it is a trump card. It's like as soon as Gabbie's not getting her way, then she can argue that Trisha is not being a good feminist.
This is a super quick reminder to like this video and subscribe to my channel if that's something you want to do. If that's not something you want to do, just don't. I'll shut up and start talking now.
By not supporting her, it's not even not supporting her music career or her want to make it in the industry, but supporting her beliefs about it. Where Trisha was talking about what's actually feasible, not necessarily that it's impossible. And she's right. Consumers of media are typically pretty young. It's true. People do want to see somebody young, typically, especially when it comes to things like pop music and entertainment that is related to that. Getting these teenage pop stars, you have that potential to have a long-standing career that starts with a lot of interest sparked because people do like to watch young performers. And they did bring up a few artists. I remember Gabbie naming Katy Perry. They talked about Lizzo. But the thing is that these women didn't start their careers at 29 or 26 or 30 or what have you. And just to throw it back to another episode on the podcast when it was Box of Thoughts, I think, there was a moment. I remember it because a lot of people noticed that Gabbie sounded like she was kind of like barking at Irene. It was like an uncomfortable thing for the audience to watch. Gabbie and Irene are talking about Lizzo and when her career started. Irene said something about Lizzo popping off in the past couple of years, which, by the way, I agree with. And Gabbie said no.
I love Lizzo so much. And I think that I think her rise is like, it's tough because like hers was more of like an explosion.
No, Lizzo's?
Yeah, dude.
Nah.
Really?
I say that's
think
a hard
so.
no. Lizzo's been at it forever.
No,
I remember,
I'm saying she like popped off and people started recognizing how great she was this year. I
don't think that's true because her first big hit was like 4 years ago.
Which one was that?
I do my hair
Good as hell.
check
Well,
my
but
nails.
I'm saying it was not nearly as big as Truth Hurts was, even though Truth Hurts came out.
No, but that's why
before.
I'm saying what you're saying isn't true.
If your friends don't make you feel like the coolest fucking person on earth at all times, they're not your friends.
Yeah.
She had been making music for a long time by the time they had that conversation. So both of those things could be true. But the point is that Gabbie recognized that Lizzo's been making music for a long time. So I was surprised that she would use Lizzo as an example. I looked up Lizzo's age and her discography, and I found that she is 32. And the first album that I saw of hers was put out in 2012. So 9 years ago, that would put Lizzo at around 23 years old when she started her music career and actually recorded an album, if I'm not mistaken, not just an EP. So someone like Lizzo did start earlier. A lot of the examples that Gabbie brought up were people who started their career earlier. And so Trisha did say something like, it's not to say that these people aren't legends, because they are. Madonna at 65, but I'd rather watch Britney at 15. But the point is that these people that we see, that we respect, these musicians that we respect and love to watch in their 30s, typically have had a long-standing career of a decade or so. Not to say that it can't happen that you start recording music at 26, that you get your first contract at 29 or 30. Not sure if Gabbie's turned 30 yet. It's just not the norm. So if it happens for Gabbie, that means she will be the exception to the rule. And if she truly believes that's going to happen and it happens, then great. You are the exception to the rule. But I don't think it was Trisha that said this. I don't remember where I heard this. It's not something that you can just necessarily wish to happen. A lot of parts go into that. And I think that's where Trisha was coming from. And it sounded like Gabbie was coming from a place of, please support this dream of mine. And I just think that going about it that way is not a way to get support. I think it would have made more sense if they had kind of let that be and talked about the songs, Gabbie's songs, that Trisha liked. That would have been a good way to show Trisha supporting Gabbie and her music career. And I have no doubts that given that question, which songs of Gabbie's do you like, Trisha will have answers to. In fact, I think she likes the two songs that I like, which are Out Loud and Butterflies. She said, you've got some bops. Like you've got some songs that are really good that I really enjoy. I think if they had just left the argument behind, there would have been more space for that uplifting woman to woman time that maybe Gabbie was really seeking out. So going back to the whole are we not friends thing, Trisha went back there and kind of said that she thinks this is partially her fault, that she is somebody who does not have a good perception of boundaries. She probably meant respecting other people's boundaries too, but specifically in this moment, it sounded like she was talking about boundaries for herself. Like, I don't know how to set boundaries. She said, sometimes fans will ask if they can buy me a drink, and then I go out when I really should go home. And because she doesn't really know how to set those boundaries, and to speak to people in a certain way that's not going to give them a certain impression. She kind of understood why maybe Gabbie thought that they were friends. So she did take on some of the blame for that, which I don't know if we would have seen Trisha do that if it hadn't been for really, I think frenemies. I think frenemies is the magic ingredient in all of this. Trisha has talked about doing DBT, so we know she's in therapy. We've also seen her do work with Ethan and Dr. Drew. I think a combination of being in good company, being in a stable relationship, going to therapy, and truly introspecting and truly owning your part in your problems has helped Trisha to understand what role she played in this situation, because for sure she did. So I do commend Trisha for doing that and for taking responsibility for her part in this whole confusion about whether or not the girls are friends. Now I realize I've been saying women this whole time, and I want to take a moment to recognize that Trisha Paytas has told us that she identifies as non-binary with the pronouns she, they. So using those pronouns is correct, but it's incorrect for me to refer to them as ladies and women. So I apologize. I should have been saying people this whole time. But I don't know whether I put this at the beginning of the video or not. This thing is going to be a Frankenstein hodgepodge mixed bag quilt stitched together editing nightmare. But I do think it's important that I put that out there. But I hope you guys understand. Trisha is a person. Trisha is a she and a they. So because people were commenting on this first follow-up video, Trisha posted a follow-up to her follow-up. And she started that one by saying, basically, I do check comments for a certain amount of time because I want to know what people think of me. And I do find that to be a bit ironic, and I want to call out Trisha for that. Although I think that there might be room for both of these things to exist. Let me explain. On the podcast, one of the topics that these people talked about was Gabbie asked Trisha whether or not she thinks about how people perceive her. And I think we all do to some extent, but Trisha's answer was a pretty flat no. I don't think about those things. She also made some points that Trisha didn't understand why Gabbie was so consumed with the opinions of people on the internet, but that's not reality. And I think that is a good point. It's a good mindset to be in when like internet comments are starting to get to you. And I do believe, Trisha, that maybe she gets to that point eventually, that she does think, okay, this is just the internet. These are not the people in my life, basically. These are not the people that matter the most to me. So, perhaps Trisha is able to divorce herself from the negative comments and all of that and the need to know what people are saying about her and thinking about her. But she is recognizing in this follow-up video that at least initially she does care about what people think of her. So I think it maybe would have been a little bit more prudent of Trisha to say, I get it because I think about those things too. It just doesn't consume me. Or once I notice that it's starting to consume me, I take a step back and realize that this is not reality to me, or whatever the truth is for Trisha. But the point is, there is a contradiction there between what she said to Gabbie and what she said in this video. She was very clear to Gabbie that Gabbie should not care what people think of her. And she even asked her a couple of times, like, why do you care? But I do think that is something she probably understands a little bit more than she let on to. And it might be this new Trish. It might be this new healthier Trish has a better relationship with that stuff, but surely she has understood at some point, or at least in what she's saying here. You guys get the point. And so then she talks about the whole November 2019 situation, what I call Herpygate. I guess the two of them got into some sort of tiff, some little argument over who started it, basically. And Trisha's point was to tell Gabbie, you started this, by going on Insta stories and talking about the situation and also not blurring my name. And apparently, according to Trisha, Gabbie insisted that Trisha posted her video first, and then Trisha said, no, I remember I remember I was moving. I had a friend over. I stopped to record that video and she was like, I remember this. I remember this. So it's kind of funny to see the shoe on the other foot, but I wonder if anybody's recognizing that. And also, it's another one of those things that's like, this should be falsifiable, right? There should be some way to tell which came first. It's not the chicken or the egg, it's the Insta story and the kitchen floor rant. And so, to be quite fair, if Gabbie Hanna fans or just anyone is going to say that Trisha was gaslighting Gabbie by saying, I don't remember this thing that happened, then wouldn't it be true that Gabbie is gaslighting Trisha when Trisha says, no, you did this first, and Gabbie says, it was you that did it first? I don't think that that's necessarily what Gabbie was trying to do. She didn't call Trisha a narcissist as far as I know, so we didn't get the usual indicators of a gaslighting moment from Gabbie Hanna. So that's just me being a little snarky, but I don't necessarily think that Gabbie was trying to do that. I think that she is misremembering the situation. I genuinely think that her memory of situations just kind of fits whatever feels best for her, what will kind of work out best in her favor. But I still, even after that blatant lie last week, I still believe that she's not necessarily lying. She just is misremembering a lot. But I want to get into another topic that came up in these videos, and I think it's really a really important topic. And I think it's something that we do need to talk about. And that is the topic of trauma dumping, if you've never heard that term, but apparently that was going on a good bit in between takes where Gabbie would essentially unload her traumas onto Trisha. And it's unclear as to how inviting Trisha was to that. You know, Trisha made it out to be like, Gabbie did nothing wrong. I commend her for being vulnerable. Yes, props to Gabbie for being vulnerable in front of Trisha Paytas and in front of her audience. However, there's a however. I'm sorry, it just is. The way Trisha described this, again, paraphrasing here, but she was saying something like Gabbie would offload this trauma onto her, and that it would start off as something that was relevant to the two of them, and then all of a sudden Gabbie would start talking about her drama with other people. And according to Trisha, it was commendable of Gabbie to be that vulnerable, but at the same time, once they actually started to film, by that point Trisha was overwhelmed and confused, and that's what we saw in that obvious discomfort. And I do want to point this out because I think this is a pattern of behavior on Gabbie's part, and if this somehow gets to Gabbie, like a lot of things that I say do for some reason, I do think that this is a pattern of behavior that if she is not aware of it, Gabbie is going to have to look at and work on, because this same thing happened to me in that one the phone conversation that I had with Gabbie. If you haven't seen that video where I explain that, I talk about walking away from that conversation and feeling like, I think we're cool, but I still feel icky. That was weird. That's kind of how I felt walking away from this podcast. But it did start the same way, is that we knew we were going into an argument, or a disagreement rather. We knew we were stepping into a disagreement. So this conversation started off as like, hey, it's Gabbie. Hey, I know, it's Alicia. And pretty soon after us getting on the phone, Gabbie started talking about situations with her bullies that had nothing to do with me. At that time, I did not know any of those people. Not personally, anyway, I knew of them. And I was just very confused as to why she was telling me these things. Especially because she and I are not and never have been friends. And once I did start talking to some people who know Gabbie and talked about this thing that confused me, I heard from other people that she does this to everyone. That could be bullies being bullies, but it's happened to Trisha, it's happened to me, and I hear it's happened to other people. I'm not trying to dunk on Gabbie, but this is important. This is important. That it almost seems like a manipulation tactic. You know, I use that word very sparingly on my channel, but it seems like possibly a manipulation tactic to gain sympathy from the other side, perhaps in a moment where you perceive disagreement or hostility or some other thing that might annihilate your sense of self or your feelings. And that's as far into armchair psychology as I'm gonna get in terms of my own analysis. But that is, to me, that's kind of how it felt. It was kind of like, please understand all these bad things have happened to me, so like go easy on me. That was kind of the vibe I got in my experience, and secondhand hearing about it in this experience that Trisha talks about. And they do talk about, and it's been pointed out several times, but Gabbie did kind of refer to this as a therapy session where she kind of treated Trisha like her therapist. And Trisha said that she's fine with that, so we shouldn't be too hard on her for that. But I do want to make a point about trauma dumping and consent and appropriateness in terms of your relationship to the person you are trauma dumping on. My best friend once talked to me about this new thing that she heard or read somewhere, and she wanted to practice it, which is to ask your friends if you can vent before you do it. So that is something that I've tried to practice, and then I realized, like, as much as I'm trying to be perfect about this, it's not really all that natural. But when there is something that I want to unload, just kind of out of nowhere, I will ask my friends if they have the bandwidth to handle that. Or at least I try to remember to do that. But one of the keywords here, while the primary operative keyword is consent, you ask for consent to unload. The secondary operative word is friend. Those are my friends that I talk to about those things. And that is important because the closer you are to somebody, the more likely you are to know their traumas and their triggers. When you trauma dump on somebody and you guys don't know each other's traumas and history and triggers, you may be triggering something in that person that you're unloading onto and then causing a resurgence of their own traumas. So it's a very dangerous thing, in my opinion, to do. It's dangerous emotionally, and because a lot of us already have traumas going into conversations like this, and Trisha recognizes that the two of them have a lot. It makes sense that would be very uncomfortable, that would be kind of an energy suck, and it's just not appropriate. It is just not appropriate to do this to somebody who's not your friend and without consent. Perhaps she asked Trisha and Trisha gave consent, but to me, that's the feeling that I get when Trisha talks about being overwhelmed and uncomfortable by these situations. And I think some of that shows too in one of the things that we kind of saw happen, but then behind the scenes, I guess there was a little bit more of it, where Gabbie unloaded a lot of family stuff, particularly things about her mom being abusive and her mom having BPD. And so when they started this conversation, Gabbie kind of expressed to Trisha, probably with nothing but good intentions, I'm sure, but expressed to Trisha that she feels that she gets Trisha. She gets it. She understands Trisha because Trisha has BPD and Gabbie's mom has BPD. And so like she understands it, which all good and well to use your experiences to forge empathy for somebody, especially if it's somebody that you don't get along with. I do it. I think it's a good practice. It's not a good practice to go to that person and be like, you're just like my abusive parent, so I get why you are this way. At another point, Trisha does say something like, when Gabbie made that point, it was kind of like, what, so you get me enough to put up with me? Is that kind of the message that you're putting across? And Trisha essentially said that she felt condescended by that, and who wouldn't be? Even though it was probably well-intentioned, it's condescending to somebody to say, I understand you and that you're somebody who is problematic, and so I can handle dealing with you, really. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. And so, yeah, that's super offensive. There's no other way to put it. It's one thing to say, to compare the person you're talking to somebody important in your life and saying, I understand you because this other person, XYZ, really positive things. It should be positive things that you say about that person. You remind me of my mom in these ways. She's super nurturing. She is so funny. She's super smart, whatever it may be. But don't unload onto somebody how awful your mother is and then in the same conversation say that you get that person because that person must be just like your mother. Y'all get that. I didn't need to reiterate, but we've been at this for a year, so you know me by now. So there's a little bit of a mixed message here as to how welcome this trauma dumping was to Trisha, because she does say, like I said, she commended Gabbie again for opening up. And she did note, too, that it maybe makes sense that she felt like she could open up to me because for all these years, she thought we were friends, which is a decent point, but I don't think that's why Gabbie opened up to her necessarily, or not the whole reason. But Trisha does go on to say that that was a lot for her. And it was a lot for her, particularly because they weren't friends. And so this kind of just comes full circle and shows that it doesn't work to do this. It doesn't work to trauma dump on somebody that you don't know and without consent. Trisha even said that something along the lines of, I can't even handle my own traumas, she's still trying to work those out. So I can't handle somebody else's. And that really goes to show you just one small example of why friendship or closeness and consent are kind of really important things when it comes to opening up and unloading your traumas. Oliver, do you mind not scratching for just a few more minutes? And Trisha ended this video by commending Gabbie again for her vulnerability. And it really seemed like Trisha was trying to keep things positive, keep things civil. I hope they stay that way. I really do. I don't blame her for wanting to kind of clear her name, because this podcast was edited by Gabbie or, Gabbie's people. And it did reflect badly on Trisha in some ways. So I don't blame her for wanting to clear her name. But I did find it interesting that the tone that Trisha kept throughout these videos. It's really unlike any other Trisha Paytas video. I mean, I don't watch her videos on a regular basis, but just comparing this Trisha to Trisha in her bedroom last summer or so, referring to Gabbie as crackhead and a fat gnome, which those things are not okay to call people. But that energy compared to this person, the way she was talking, she sounded like a super rational person. And I was like, oh, I could maybe see myself being friends with this person. She seems likable, friendly, which is ironic because that's what I used to think about Gabbie. But people change. People, they go through waves. Sometimes they're likable and sometimes they're not. And sometimes they go back to being likable, and thus the cycle continues. So that's kind of the not so brief rundown of Trisha's follow-up videos and my thoughts on these particular discussions that came up and kind of what I found to be an important message that somebody needs to talk about. So that's that. Sound off in the comments. But I will say that I would like to have a break from talking about Gabbie Hanna for a little while, at least until something else comes up that doesn't involve me. Something fun that doesn't involve Gabbie Hanna. Yay, segue. I promised you guys a glasses try-on haul. A haul of all 4 pairs. I do have another pair coming in the mail. I'll go ahead and flash those on the screen right now. I'll probably wear them in a video coming up if they're cute. But I mentioned earlier that this video is sponsored. It is sponsored by Smart Buy Glasses. There is a link in the description just to let them know that you came from my video. And there's also a promo code LEASH10 to get 10% off your order on anything except for contacts. So I'm not a contacts kind of bitch. I am a glasses bitch. I have 4 pairs with me right now from Smart Buy Glasses, and 2 are designer, 2 are affordable, super affordable, more affordable than a Chipotle burrito. So I want you to guess which of these pairs you think are designer and which you think are affordable, and let me know in the comments if you guessed correctly. So here's the first pair. It's kind of a different take on my usual square glasses. I am a fan, possibly a good replacement for my everyday glasses, if I can break out of my habits. I chose this pair hoping that they would look cute as kind of an everyday sort of thing. Pair number 2 looked like a lot of fun. Do I look like I belong on a true crime documentary? And I mean as the subject of a true crime documentary. But they're interesting because they've got this geometric shape at the top, which I haven't seen before in any other glasses. Pair number 3. I was not sure what I was going to think of these. And I actually really think they're pretty cute. Who's to say this can't be my everyday look? I don't know. And lastly, we've got some classics here. What is designer, what's not? You might be able to guess that the more everyday looking glasses were the designer ones, just based on the fact that, like I said, I might want to bring them into my rotation that doesn't exist yet. But I would like to develop a rotation that includes some fun glasses, but also some classics. I should mention these are Gucci. I don't remember the price. They were a little over $200, and Tom Ford. You might have recognized the branding here. These were, I believe, $173. And then, of course, these two. $7 each. This one is the Denny. If you liked the wire-rimmed glasses, those are the Denny. And then over here, the plastic, we have the Lori. The underdog that actually ended up being probably my favorite of the bunch. I mean, you can literally shop there and get a whole freaking haul, an actual haul, and not feel guilty, because these glasses in the Smart Buy collection are typically, I think, $7 across the board. There might be some variation in price, but they just asked me to provide you guys a link and a code and sent me these glasses in return. So you can check out that link down below. Please, please, please use the link and my code leash10 at checkout if you do end up purchasing something, which I would recommend. As far as shipping time, these came to me in about a week after I placed the order. I looked online to see if that was standard, if that is the experience that other people had, before I, come up here and be like, your glasses will show up in 1 week and then they take 3 months. I saw online that other reviewers noted that it usually took about up to a week, like 3 to 5 days typically for the Smart Buy collection. So your Denny's and your Lori's, and up to 2 weeks. I think it said something between 6 and 14 days, something like that, for the designer glasses. But what I really, really like too, I should mention, I'm just really excited about this because I have broken so many pairs of glasses, but they do include a free set of replacement lenses. So I need to do better about rotating glasses and wearing different glasses, at least in video. So I'm going to try to do that for you guys more. I want to thank Smart Buy Glasses for sponsoring today's video. Thank you for these gorgeous pairs of glasses, and thank you for giving my viewers an opportunity to save some money on an already ridiculously inexpensive product. Thank you to them, to you, the one person who's watching, who's not me. Thank you to you too. I love you, dude. And that's all I've got for you. I am going to get ready for bed. All right, thanks. Bye.